She stopped where everyone else sped past, train horns screaming, the ground shaking beneath her feet. Inside a filthy sack, a wounded dog lay sedated, left to die on the tracks. She had seconds to choose. What she didn't know was that saving him would expose something far darker. Before you scroll, before you look away, I need you to hear this. Somewhere in America tonight, an animal is crying in silence, not because it's invisible, but because someone chose not to stop. And the truth is uncomfortable. Rescue doesn't begin with heroes. It begins with a decision. Your decision. This channel isn't about perfect endings or easy emotions. It's about the moments that test who we really are when no one is watching. Because compassion isn't proven by what we say online, it's revealed by what we do when suffering is right in front of us. In today's story, one abandoned animal will cross paths with a stranger who never planned to become a rescuer. No badge of honor. No training. Just a human choice made in seconds, with consequences that will last a lifetime. But there's a twist, one that turns the rescuer into the rescued, and forces a community to confront a truth they tried to bury. So before this story unfolds, I ask you to do 3 things. Like this video if you believe animals deserve a voice. Subscribe if you stand for compassion over cruelty. Stay until the end, because what happens next isn't just their story, it's a mirror held up to all of us. If you're ready, let's begin. The call came in just after dawn, when the streets of Riverton, Missouri were still quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. Marissa Hale was halfway through her morning coffee when her phone buzzed. Not an emergency alert, not police radio chatter, just a text from a railroad maintenance worker she'd met months earlier. Something's alive near the East Freight Line. And it's not supposed to be. Marissa wasn't a rescuer. She worked nights as a freight dispatcher and volunteered weekends at a local shelter. She'd learned that animals were often abandoned in places where noise could drown out suffering. Industrial zones, drainage culverts, rail corridors. Places people passed without seeing. The East Freight Line cut through a stretch of land no one claimed. Rusted signs. Overgrown weeds. A place where trains never slowed and guilt never lingered. As Marissa parked her car beside a leaning mile marker, the ground vibrated beneath her boots. A distant horn echoed, long and unforgiving. That's when she heard it, thin, broken, desperate. A sound too small to survive where steel ruled. She followed it, heart pounding, not knowing that this single step off the road would bind her life to a creature someone else had already given up on. The crying grew louder as Marissa moved closer to the tracks, her steps slowing with every yard. The gravel shifted beneath her feet, sharp and unstable, as another freight train thundered past on the opposite line. The wind it kicked up carried the smell of oil, metal, and heat. Then she saw it. A canvas sack, darkened with dirt and rain, lay wedged against the base of a signal pole. It was tied clumsily, the knot already loosening, as if whoever left it hadn't cared enough to finish the job properly. The sound was coming from inside. Marissa dropped to her knees, fingers trembling as she pulled the sack open. A young mixed-breed dog, no more than 6 months old, lay curled inside. His fur was matted. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. His chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. But what stopped her wasn't the injury. It was his eyes. They weren't panicked. They weren't wild. They were locked onto her face, steady and searching, as if he'd already decided she was his last chance. Another horn blared, closer this time. Marissa didn't think. She didn't weigh risks or consequences. She scooped the dog into her arms and ran, the ground shaking behind her as steel screamed past where he'd been left to die. Marissa's arms burned as she reached her car, the dog's weight heavier than it should have been. He whimpered once, then went quiet, his head falling against her shoulder. Panic rushed in fast and sharp. "No, no, stay with me," she whispered, fumbling with her keys. She laid him gently across the back seat, using her jacket to keep his body from sliding as she pulled onto the road. The nearest emergency vet was 20 minutes away, 20 minutes that felt impossible. Every red light felt like betrayal. At the clinic, the staff moved fast. Doors swung open. Hands reached in. Someone asked questions Marissa barely heard. Possible fracture. Dehydrated. Could be sedated. That last word hit her hardest. Someone hadn't just abandoned him. They'd made sure he couldn't escape. As the vet disappeared through swinging doors, Marissa sat alone, staring at her shaking hands. She realized something unsettling. This wasn't a simple rescue anymore. Whoever did this hadn't acted out of fear or desperation. It was deliberate. An hour later, the veterinarian returned with a guarded expression. "He's stable," she said. "But there's something else." She hesitated before continuing. "We found a tracking chip, and it's been registered before." Marissa's stomach tightened. This dog had a past. And someone out there was already lying about it. The veterinarian slid a clipboard across the counter, her finger resting on a single line of text. Registered name, Atlas. Marissa stared at it longer than she needed to. A name meant care, intention, time. You didn't name an animal like that unless, at some point, you wanted them. The chip was activated 3 years ago, the vet explained. But ownership was never updated. The number traces back to a decommissioned training facility in Illinois. Training for what? Marissa asked. The vet hesitated. Search and recovery. Not police, private contract work. That didn't make sense. Atlas was young. Too young to have completed anything that serious. As if sensing her confusion, Atlas shifted on the table, his tail tapping weakly despite the 4 in his leg. He looked at Marissa with quiet recognition, like she wasn't new to him at all. Later that night, Marissa took him home under temporary foster approval. She set up a blanket beside her couch, unsure how to exist in the same room with something that had been so deliberately discarded. As she reached to adjust his bandage, Atlas lifted his head and placed a paw against her wrist, steady, grounding. Marissa realized then that this dog hadn't been thrown away because he was useless. He'd been abandoned because he knew something. And whatever it was, someone wanted it buried along those tracks. Atlas healed faster than anyone expected. Within days, he was standing. Within a week, he was pacing the living room, alert and restless, as if waiting for instructions that never came. Marissa noticed it most when sirens passed outside. Atlas didn't flinch, he focused. His ears tilted, his body leaned toward the sound, muscles tightening with purpose. This wasn't instinct. It was conditioning. One evening, while cleaning out the canvas sack the police had released back to her, Marissa found something she'd missed before. Sewn into the inner seam was a thin strip of reflective tape, and beneath it, a faint chemical scent the vet had mentioned earlier. Sedative residue. Atlas hadn't been injured by accident. He'd been neutralized. When Marissa dropped her keys later that night, they skidded across the floor and disappeared beneath the couch. Before she could react, Atlas was already there, pulling them free with careful precision and placing them gently in her hand. He sat back, waiting. That's when it clicked. Atlas wasn't just trained to search. He was trained to retrieve. Whatever had happened at that Illinois facility, whatever contract went wrong, Atlas had become a liability. And someone decided the easiest way to erase a problem was to let a train do it. Atlas met Marissa's eyes, tail thumping once. He hadn't forgotten his job. He was waiting for permission to finish it. The email arrived just after midnight. Marissa almost ignored it, assuming it was another automated shelter update. But the subject line stopped her cold. Regarding Atlas, urgent. The sender was a retired logistics investigator named Caleb Monroe, formerly contracted by private recovery firms across the Midwest. He'd seen a post Marissa shared in a closed rescue group, Just a photo of Atlas resting on her couch, his bandaged leg visible. Caleb's message was brief, but heavy. Atlas was part of a recovery operation tied to a missing freight shipment 2 years ago. Multiple animals were used. One incident was never resolved. Evidence vanished. The dogs were blamed. Marissa read it 3 times. According to Caleb, Atlas had located something he wasn't supposed to, something valuable enough to implicate people with money and reach. After that, the facility shut down quietly. Records disappeared. Dogs were reassigned or written off. Atlas stirred beside her as she read, his head lifting when her breath caught. She rested her hand on his neck, feeling the steady warmth there. "You didn't fail," she whispered. "They failed you." Caleb ended the email with a warning. If Atlas is alive, someone may still be looking for what he found. And suddenly, Marissa understood. Saving Atlas hadn't ended the danger. It had brought it home. Marissa noticed the SUV 3 days later. It sat across the street, engine off, windows tinted too dark for a quiet neighborhood. It didn't belong to anyone nearby, and it didn't move when other cars came and went. Atlas noticed it too. His body stiffened the moment he saw it through the window, a low sound building in his chest. Not a growl, but a warning. That night, the power flickered. Once. Twice. Marissa reached for her phone when Atlas bolted toward the back door, barking sharply, controlled, deliberate. Not fear. Defense. A shadow moved beyond the fence. Marissa's heart slammed as she grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, keeping Atlas behind her despite his resistance. The beam caught fresh footprints in the dirt near the gate. Someone had been there. Recently. The next morning, her mailbox was open. Inside lay a folded note with no name, no return address. "The dog doesn't belong to you." Marissa's hands shook, but Atlas pressed against her leg, grounding her. She realized then that whoever abandoned him hadn't expected survival. And they definitely hadn't expected resistance. This wasn't about reclaiming property. It was about silencing proof. And Atlas, loyal, observant, unbroken, was the one thing they couldn't afford to lose again. Marissa didn't wait for another warning. By morning, she'd contacted Caleb Monroe and forwarded the note to a local investigative journalist known for exposing corporate misconduct. She also did something harder. She called the police, not to file a report about a dog, but about intimidation. What changed everything was Atlas. At the station, while Marissa spoke with an officer, Atlas grew restless. His attention fixed on a row of old evidence lockers lining the far wall. He pulled gently at his leash, nose low, body working with quiet urgency. The officer noticed. "He trained." "Yes," Marissa said. "Search and recovery." They allowed Atlas closer. He stopped at one locker. Then another. Finally he sat, perfectly still, staring at a rusted unit marked Case 417B. Inside were sealed items from a cold freight theft tied to the same Illinois facility Caleb had mentioned. The room went silent. Atlas hadn't just remembered his training. He'd followed it. Within hours, investigators reopened the case. The locker contained misfiled samples, fibers, residue, shipping seals, that never should have been buried. Atlas hadn't been abandoned because he failed. He'd been discarded because he succeeded. And now, the truth had teeth, and a heartbeat. The arrests didn't come immediately. Instead, the story broke first. Documents leaked. Names surfaced. The Illinois facility wasn't just a training center, it was a front. Animals like Atlas had been used to locate stolen freight tied to an interstate smuggling ring. When Atlas alerted on a shipment containing evidence that traced back to a federal contractor, everything unraveled. That's when the real twist emerged. Atlas wasn't the only one marked for disposal. Records showed that the handler assigned to Atlas, a woman named Serena Caldwell, had vanished the same week the facility shut down. Officially, she'd resigned. Unofficially, she'd tried to report what she'd seen. Marissa froze when the journalist called. "They framed her," he said. "And when that didn't stick, they erased her." Atlas had been sedated and dumped not because he was dangerous, but because he was loyal. He kept searching for Serena long after she disappeared. The freight line where he was left. It ran less than a mile from where Serena's car had been found abandoned 2 years earlier. Atlas hadn't been waiting to finish a job. He'd been trying to find his person. And by saving him, Marissa had unknowingly reopened a case no one wanted solved. Serena Caldwell was found alive. She'd been living under a protected identity in Arizona, hidden after a failed whistleblower attempt that nearly cost her everything. When investigators finally reached her, the first thing she asked wasn't about the case. "Is Atlas alive?" The reunion happened quietly, away from cameras. Atlas limped into the room, hesitated only once, then surged forward, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Serena dropped to her knees, sobbing as he pressed his head into her chest, right where he always had. Justice followed swiftly after that. The facility was shut down permanently. Contracts dissolved. Charges filed. What they couldn't undo was the damage, but they could stop it from spreading. Serena didn't take Atlas back. She looked at Marissa and smiled through tears. "He already chose you." Marissa hadn't planned to become a rescuer. She hadn't planned to be brave. She'd just stopped where others sped past. Atlas curled beside her that night, safe at last. And Marissa understood something profound. She hadn't saved Atlas from the tracks. Atlas had pulled her into a purpose she never knew she needed. If this story moved you, it's because it was never just about Atlas. It was about the moments we rush past, the cries we convince ourselves aren't our responsibility, and the quiet courage it takes to stop anyway. Atlas survived because one person chose compassion over convenience. And because of that choice, the truth came out, lives were protected, and justice finally had a voice. But here's the part most people miss. Stories like this don't end when the screen fades to black. They're happening right now, in shelters, on highways, behind locked doors, waiting for someone to care enough to act. If Atlas taught us anything, it's this: animals remember kindness, and they never forget betrayal. So if you believe rescue is more than a hashtag, if you believe silence helps cruelty survive, and if you believe one decision can change everything, like this video to stand for those without a voice. Subscribe to keep these stories alive and visible. Share this story, because awareness is a form of rescue too. And most importantly, the next time you hear a cry where no one else is looking, I hope you remember Atlas. Until the next rescue, stay human.